everyone, and welcome to day one of May Monetization. These are 9 trainings that I'm dripping out over May that are going to help you to monetize your author brand. And we're starting with writing, because if you don't write a good book, then it doesn't matter how amazing you are at marketing. That's eventually going to backfire on you in the form of like negative reviews, crippling self-doubt at some point. I'm telling you this because I've been through it. So I really want to make sure you guys are putting your best foot forward and writing a really good book, especially because it is so much work to write a book in the first place that you really don't want to have to go back and rewrite the book and do all this work to kind of fix up a story that you know has potential and you know people are going to love. It's just about getting it out there in the right way so that they receive it well, right? So that kind of ties into the topic of today's video, because we're going to talk about a couple of things that delayed my book writing timeline. And basically, if you have been following along with me very closely, then you will know that I am working on a secret book under a secret pen name, and I haven't revealed very many details about it because it's an experiment and it's a surprise. So I will be revealing more about it next year, but in the meantime, I'm going to talk about the writing process for it, because I recently finished writing it. It took a month longer than I thought it would, and it didn't really go the way I thought it would. And so in the past, I've been able to write books in a week, and I can usually do it in a month if I'm doing other stuff. Obviously I run my business, I'm very busy at this point in time. So one of the reasons I left my publisher last year is just because I couldn't keep up with the deadlines. I was trying to write all these books back to back, and it just became too much. But because of that, and having had that deadline over and over again, I was able to get really good at writing books in a short time frame, regardless of me having all these other things that I was balancing. So if it's a really good idea and I'm really passionate about it, I can get it done in a week. But if it's not, then I usually get it done in a month, and that's how I do it. So this one took me longer than usual, and I'm going to talk about why that was. And so before we get into that, I also just want to kind of touch on my experience with my Starlight Chronicles series, and that was the one that was with my publisher before I left them. So basically, I won't get into what's going on with the rights and all that, but basically, I made the decision to pull it from market because the first book was not getting received very well. And even though I wrote 18 drafts of the book and it went through so many rounds of editing, it just wasn't getting received right. And I knew that the version that went out, while I was happy with it at the time, it's just not the original story that I set out to tell. And I know that that's contributing to why people are not receiving it well. And I also know that there's just some things that need to be clarified in that book to help the rest of the series, because the rest of the series has so much potential. I don't want people to read the first book and give up on the series entirely. There's 6 more books to go. So that first book kind of determines whether all these other books I'm trying to write are going to be worth it. And at the moment, I'm kind of just writing books that are not selling because of this first book. So I made the decision to pull it because I do intend to rewrite it at some point. But this is just a perfect example of why you really want to get your book right. And especially the first book, you really want to get that book right. I know that when I read the Lunar Chronicles series, I loved the first book and I hated the second book, and I wasn't going to pick up the third book, but I'm really glad I did because I loved book 3 and I loved book 4. So the thing about, if you mess up, say, book 2, for example, oftentimes people will still be invested enough to give book 3 a chance just because they know you have potential from book 1. And so that's why, if you just get book 1 right, you have a little bit of room to fail there as well. But ideally, you don't want to, fail at all. You really want every book to be good. But, we're not always going to get everything right, and that's okay as well. So just taking a little bit of pressure off you there. But that first book is really important. So why did my book take so long to write when it usually doesn't? So the first thing that came up for me was this paralyzing pressure to get it really good because of this experience I've had with the Starlight Chronicles. I was really, really intent on showing people what I was capable of with my writing and showing people that I could write a really good book. And just really blowing them away. I kind of wanted to channel Dua Lipa's energy. You know that singer, I don't know if I said her name right, but basically she's this really good singer and she has these really good songs, but she got completely dragged because of her stage presence, and people were ridiculing her ability to dance when she was doing live performances, and she kind of just with her second album, not a second album, but her album that followed that most popular one that kind of blew her up, she kind of decided she was going to prove everyone wrong. She went and became an amazing dancer, and she released a literal dance album and did all these dance videos and just proved people that, like, if people were going to criticize her, she could come back and do it better. And that was the kind of energy I wanted for this book. I wanted to show people, hey, if you're going to criticize my world building and my characterization, I'm going to show you how freaking good I can actually do it. And so I put a lot of pressure on myself to make this book really good. And right off the bat, that paralyzed me. I remember pacing my house at one point, just thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get it really good? And just not being able to actually sit down and write, because I was like, what, like, I have to get this right. And so that really was like a big struggle for me. So here's kind of how I navigated that and was able to get past it. So first of all, I got really clear on my weak points. I knew that those were my characterization and my world building, because that was the thing that got criticized the most with the Starlight Chronicles. So I sat myself down and I started reading the Throne of Glass series, because I'd heard that had very good world building in it, and it does. And so, I wanted it to be a book I hadn't read before, because I also wanted to, like, kind of pick up on things as I went and kind of realize things as I went. So I didn't sit down and just start listening. I did it on Audible, because that way I wouldn't be sucked in by reading it visually. But I sat down with the audiobook and I was listening really intently, and I wasn't just listening for the sake of enjoying it, though I am enjoying it. I'm on book 4, but I sat down and I took notes as I was listening. I was like, oh, I like how she said this, I like how she did this, so that I could get, not ideas, but just like figure out how she did it, and then figure out how to make my own work as good, right? And so I had a whole list of just, even when I was reading books on my phone, if I saw something that I liked and thought was done really well, I'd screenshot it. I'd be like, oh, I love how they describe this. And I would like just make a note, so that if I got stuck and felt like something was flat in my own book, I could kind of go back to this document and go, well, how did they do it? How can I kind of like do mine even better, right? And so that's one thing I did. Another thing is that I bought a world building ebook, because I just read ebooks, but basically it was this big book on how to build a world, and I just went through it and I looked at what am I not yet doing with my worlds, and I kind of took notes and I built it using that book, and it was really good. I can't remember what it's called, because it's actually for video games, it's not for books, but it was recommended for writers, so I downloaded it. But I will drop it in the comments for you. It just remind me, like, if I forget, just type me and go, Pagan, what's the book? And I'll drop it for you. But basically, it was really helpful. And what else did I do? I took some classes. So I got a masterclass, and I took some classes from, some of those big writers, and just like looked at what they had to say about the process, just to see if I could pick up anything that I wasn't already doing. And so I really took it seriously. I kind of sat down and went, this is what I've got to get right. I know I can do the other stuff. I've just got to study this a little bit and figure out how I can do it even better. And I really poured a lot of time and energy into that process. And then this was the most important part, because I had to accept that I'd done that work, and I'd sat down and I'd improved as a writer, and I'd like gone through that process. And then I had to actually sit down and write the book, and I had to give myself permission to fail at it. Because if I'd gone into that thinking, okay, now I've got to apply this and it has to be perfect, I just never would have been able to do it. I had to sit down and go, now that you know what to do, I have total faith that you can do it. But if you fail at it the first time, that is totally fine, because you're in control of this book. You get to decide when it goes out to the public. If this is shit the first time you sit down to write it out, you get to sit down and do it again and again until it is perfect. And so I just said, this does not have to be your final draft. It would be great if it is, but you just need to sit down and do it. And that was really permission giving for me to kind of release and detach that pressure to need it to be really good, and just accept that I'd done the work to give myself the support and the knowledge I needed to make it be good, and then I just needed to actually do it, right? So that was the first thing that kind of delayed me, because I spent so much time like sort of panicking and sitting on my own fear, and then actually going through that research process when I didn't think I'd need to do as much in the first place. So that was number 1. Number 2 was a lack of motivation. Just very simply not always being motivated to write. And this is why having a process really helps, because something I noticed is that I found a groove eventually, and that helped me to get to the end. But while I was trying to find that groove, I was like, oh, I just really don't feel like writing after I've been on client calls all day, because it's such a mindset shift. I really had to like do something different to get me out of work mode and to get me to stop thinking about work, because like I'm such a creative person when it comes to my business. I'm usually like, I might be playing video games and I get this idea for a podcast episode and I have to stop and I have to go write it down, because that's just like, I'm constantly on with my business. And so it's really hard for me to flip the switch when I've been at work that day. And so what I found to be more helpful was starting my writing stuff on a Sunday that's my day off from my business. I've built a really good habit where I just don't do business work on a Sunday. And so it was really easy for me to get into a writing mindset on a Sunday, because I just didn't have any, I didn't have any responsibilities in my business. So I knew I could totally detach from it. And then I would continue through to about Tuesday with it, because on Mondays I don't have client calls usually. And so if I need to take the Monday off, I can. Sometimes I will just like use it as a day off and then work a bit more on Saturday, for example. But basically, because I was prioritizing my book, I gave myself permission to take my Mondays off, to use it as a book writing day. And then even on Tuesdays, I was still so creatively in it that I was still able to sit down on Tuesday nights and do a bit more, even though I'd been working on the Tuesday. So that was really helpful for me to kind of find that groove, right? But before I had that, I just remember just feeling so demotivated. I remember I got sick and then I was out for a week, and then trying to get back into writing after that week was a nightmare. I was just like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do any work ever again after being sick for a week, which is really unusual. And then like the other part of it was this, like I had already written half of the draft the year before, in January of 2020 now. I thought it was 2020. I wrote the first half in 2020. And so I had a half finished draft, and I was trying to make that draft better and finish the draft, like basically. So what I ended up doing when I was like adding in the world building and the characters is that I was sitting down and I was really expanding on the chapters. I was adding chapters in, I was expanding the timeline of events, I was doing all sorts of stuff that I'd already thought I'd written the first time round, and then I realized, no, I need to actually expand on this and go into more detail and add more stuff. And that was kind of exhausting for me as someone who kind of likes to just go at it and see, like I do have an outline, but I also like to see where the story takes me, and the outline's more of a guide, right? And so when I've written a scene and I've like already done that, then I'm no longer excited to go back and work on it, because I've already got it out of my brain, and that excitement period of like getting it down is gone. So to go through all the first chapters again and have to expand on them was really exhausting for me, because I was like, I've already done this, I've already been through this, I know what happens, I know what the characters do. Even though I was adding new stuff, it was like, I've already, like, we've done this, I don't want to have to do it again. And so that was also really holding me back from a motivation standpoint, because I just was more excited to work on the stuff I hadn't gotten to yet. And I felt like it took me so long to get there after I'd done all the fleshing out, that it just took me so long. And so that was really exhausting to go through, but that the solution to that was more just having the discipline to stick with it. There was no magic pill, there was no like finding a shiny idea, because I knew what had to kind of go in there, and it was more of like enhancing what I'd already done. It wasn't really coming up with new ideas. There were some which helped, but it wasn't like largely that process. So it was really just me sitting down and going, if this book is going to get done, I just need to sit down and get it done. And what helps me is structure. So for me, it was helpful for me to look at my outline and go, today I'm going to do these 3 chapters. And I would highlight those chapters and I'd go, I'm not leaving my desk until I get these done. And that was just helpful to have that discipline to sit down and do it, because otherwise it just wouldn't have gotten done. But when it comes to getting motivated, something that's really helpful is knowing what motivates you. And for me, it's like, it's not only like doing creative stuff before I write that helps to get me into a writing mood, but it's also knowing what motivates me, and that's largely just doing the new stuff that I haven't done yet in my manuscript. And so like once I got past that midway point, it was really easy to keep going, and I kind of flew through the rest. But something that helped me get through the early chapters was before my writing session, I would actually sit down and I would listen to music, and I would do that for about an hour. And I know not everyone has an hour, but I am single and I live on my own, and I don't have kids, so I can do that. I can sit down for an hour, and I tried to find songs that got me in the right mood for that scene, and just waited until it clicked. And so because it took so long after working all day to like get that in and done, and get into to that right mindset, it did take an hour. And I think like this is something that is a little bit difficult for writers to accept and navigate, is that writing is a process. It's not like a to-do you can tick off your list. It's really this thing that requires space to think and to be creative and to be in it. And if you aren't giving yourself that space, then it's going to be that much harder. And so it's really helpful when you've got an hour to get creative, and that's what I highly recommend, because as a creative process, that's kind of what you need as a writer. But I understand that not everyone has that. And so when it comes to that, sometimes you just got to be really diligent and make the most of the time you do have. And that's where having an outline can be helpful, and it's where having that clarity can be helpful, because if you don't have time, then you really can't afford to waste what you do have. So you've got to be as clear as you possibly can. I know that it would have been so much harder if I hadn't had the clarity that I had in the first place, to be sitting down and going, I know what I've got to do, I've just got to get there, right? And that kind of leads me to my third point, is that while I did have clarity, I didn't have total clarity on this book, and that's something that really held me back as well. I know that there were things I was really up in the air about as I sat down to kind of make these changes, especially because I was trying to improve the characters and world building. And so I sat down, and the first thing that came to mind was just how much the protagonist and the love interest weren't clicking in the beginning. And I thought, are they actually meant to be together? And as I kept writing, I just felt like, no, I feel like this might not work. And so I got to a point where I actually started playing with another potential love interest, and I almost created a love triangle. And that was really complicated for me, because I was kind of going through the writing process and going, okay, well, if she ends up with this guy, then I've got to make sure I talk about this. But if she ends up with the other guy, I've got to make sure I do this. And so not only was I trying to write the book, but I was trying to guess at what I needed to put in as I was going. And having clarity from the beginning of who she ended up with and why that would work would have helped me to not have to go through that process, especially because I ended up going back and just taking that whole love interest. No, I didn't take him out, but I took the love part out. I was like, she's not going to end up with this guy. She's actually going to end up with the original guy. So we're going to take out all these flirtations and whatnot. And like that just would have been helpful to know from the beginning. I mean, I kind of did know from the beginning, but what I needed was more clarity on why those two characters actually would connect. And so that was something that would have been helpful to have. And then basically, I remember I got really stuck at one point, and I was actually stuck for a whole week, and I couldn't write the next chapter, and I kept trying, and it just wasn't flowing, and I couldn't figure out why. And I kept feeling like there wasn't enough information, but I knew what the point of the chapter was, so I couldn't figure out why there was that feeling of like, she doesn't have enough info. What I realized is that I didn't have enough info, and that's because I needed to understand my other love interest a bit better. And that's when it hit me. I was like, oh, this is meant to be a dual pov book. I'm meant to actually write from the perspective of the other guy in some circumstances, so that we get insights to how he's experiencing the story and how he's doing things, because that's going to help me then put the right actions into the story for the protagonist, so that this can like actually add up as a proper match and like have them end up together. And I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, like if I'd known this from the beginning, I could have been more strategic when I planned out my chapters and whatnot. But it ended up working out. Once I got that clarity on this is meant to be 2 povs, not 1, I ended up writing, I think I wrote like 3 chapters in one go. Like I immediately sat down and changed, I pushed that chapter I was trying to write aside, and I started a new chapter from the other guy, flew through it really quickly. And then I went back to that other chapter I'd been working on, flew through that really quickly, and then like kept going. And that, like, the fact that it just got me back on track so quickly was like, I wish I'd known that earlier. I wish I'd known that a week ago before I sat here for a week and tried to figure out why I couldn't write my book. And so that is really helpful, just like knowing like who's telling the story and why, and having that clarity, right? And then another thing that came up for me at one point was just not having clarity on my characters. And I remember talking about this in a post, but basically I got to a point where I was about, I think I was just past the midway point, and I was just feeling like I needed better, I didn't need better motivations, I needed stronger motivations and like kind of understanding of why the characters were thinking certain things and doing certain things. And I was like, I need to get clear on the characters. So I sat down and I created a really basic sort of questionnaire for each character to help me get clear on it. And once I had that, I was like, okay, this is good. I know what my characters are doing now, and I was able to keep going. But I had to kind of stop and get that clarity again. And so clarity, I know for a fact, clarity is just one of the biggest things that can help you write your book. And clarity can come in the form of a book outline, but it can also come from just reflecting on what's going on in your book. And sometimes that's really hard to do on your own. Sometimes it takes you a week to figure out on your own because you're not like asking yourself the right questions to get to the answer. That's where having a coach can be really, really helpful. And it's where even I need a coach sometimes. I do have a coach, but like even I need to talk to people sometimes about my book and get really clear on what the fuck's going on. Sorry, I just swear. I do swear sometimes, I'm sorry. So basically I was just like trying to figure it out on my own. It's really difficult to do when you don't have that clarity. And it's why I would recommend getting a coach if you're trying to write a book and you're really stuck. And this could be your first book. I think especially when it's your first book and you kind of don't know what you're doing as a writer, it can be really helpful to just have someone who can help you get some kind of structure to your idea. Because like you might be really natural at it and you might just write it really easily, and other times it might just go all over the place because it's your first book. And so if you have that clarity, it can be really helpful. But also, if it's a book that you kind of just have, you're kind of just lost on, and it happens sometimes. I mean, I've written 11 books at this point. I've written 11 books. Can you believe that? And I'm 23, and I've written more books than that before Ryan Rupert. I kind of market starting at Ryan Rupert. I wrote books before that that will never see the light of day because they're really bad. But like in terms of quality publishable books, I've written 11 of them. And I think that's pretty amazing that I've written that many books and have that much experience. But at the same time, I still get stuck as a writer. We all do. And sometimes we all need a coach to help us, right? And so that's not a bad thing. If anything, if that helps you get the clarity that you need so that you can get your book out to market, because ultimately having that momentum and keeping that momentum going is going to help you to make book sales long term. If you can recognize that, and if you feel like that is worth the investment, then I absolutely 100% recommend getting a coach, taking a writing workshop, doing whatever it takes to kind of get that clarity on your book and be able to keep writing again. And something that I've noticed with my Storyteller Session Intensives is that people tend to walk out of those intensives able to write on the same day. I've had people walk out of these sessions with such clarity that they sit down on their lunch break and they write tons of words, or they sit down and write for 2 hours that night. And if you can get back into flow that quickly and get your book out that much faster as a result, then I think that's 100% worth it, right? And you know, the thing is that you can do this a long way like I did. You can go through the craft books, you can figure out the process, you can figure out the details, you can take the workshops and the classes, but that's all ultimately it's going to rely on how much clarity you can get for yourself and how fast you are at working through that process on your own and how much time you have to dedicate to that on your own. You know, if booking in with a coach is going to like help you shorten that time gap and just get to the writing, which is probably what you actually want to be doing, then I think it's 100% worth it. So like I just said, this is something that I help my clients with in my intensives, and they're called my Storyteller Session Intensives. Those are the ones that are specifically for writing, and what you can expect to walk out of those with is, if anything, you can get an outline for your book. Generally, we try to get this down, even if you don't end up using it, and then we also get you clarity on what what's happening in your book and give you that motivation so that you can keep writing. It will help you to get unstuck from any writer's block that you're having. It'll help you to figure out your characters and your storyline and your plot and all of that stuff. So if it's something you're interested in booking, I'm going to link a link in the comments below, and if I forget, you can just DM me. But basically, I should come back and do that. And if you have any questions about it, about like how it works or what you can expect from it, you can also just DM me and ask that. We can set up a time to chat on a free call about it if you prefer. But apart from that, that is all I really had to say today. Pretty sure that's everything I had to say. Let me just do a quick check on my notes. Yes, that was everything. So I hope this was helpful. I hope, let me know down below if any of the things that I talked about today is something that you've struggled with yourself recently when writing. Let me know down below, because I'd love to hear it. I'd love to know if you too have gone through any of this. And I will chat to you guys in the next video, which is coming out this week. And I will see you guys in that video and chat to you very soon. Okay, bye.